I haven't heard much about your background. And
Sure.
so I'd like to cover that on this channel. And so let's just start with your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
Born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio.
First generation American.
Yes, my parents are both immigrants. They came to this country with almost no money a little over 40 years ago. And they came with a work ethic and they came with a desire to get an education. And my mom was a geriatric psychiatrist. She took care of patients with Alzheimer's disease in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio. My dad worked at the GE plant in Evendale, Ohio under Jack Welch's tenure at GE, which was interesting as a time to go through cycles of job security when we were growing up. But anyway, they lived their version of the American dream, and they most importantly gave my brother and I the foundation for us to live ours. And so each of us went on to found successful companies that helped a lot of people in this country. And now I've got two sons of my own, and I hope we can create that same American dream for them.
Me too. What did you like to do when you were growing up? What were your hobbies?
I actually I liked sports a lot, but I ended up focusing on being a tennis player because, so anyway, those layoffs at GE, they came hard when I was in middle school. So when I was about 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, my dad ended up keeping his job by being able to go to night school in law school because GE needed patent attorneys, people who were lawyers, but also had some training as engineers. And so he went to night school for those 4 years, and we were doing all the sports, my brother and I, soccer, basketball, tennis, etc. But my mom needed one place where we could both be in the same place at the same time when she had both kids on her hands. And so that got us both into tennis, because that was the place where you wouldn't have two different soccer games in two different locations. And that actually worked out really well, where, I ended up focusing on something that I became pretty passionate about. Worked out even better for my brother because he's younger than me. And so he got better than I did by practicing against his older brother and playing with older kids along the way, because my mom needed us in one spot. And so he ended up being one of the top players in the country. I was never quite that good, but I got competitive enough, and still keep it up to this day. I was a pianist as well. We had a piano teacher who came home. She's probably one of the bigger influences on even some of my thinking.
Really?
It was early, but she planted some seeds as it related to probably what became my political perspectives today, actually.
What was one of those seeds?
Well, she gave me actually, so it was actually a funny story that led up to it. So she was pretty strict, right? Like, we would fear her coming if we had not practiced that week, which was many weeks, it turned out. And so the one thing that would somehow we discovered would throw her off her tilt is, so this is, Bill Clinton's impeachment and all of that, back in the 1990s. And so this was like all the talk everywhere. So if we brought something up relating to Bill Clinton, or let alone Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, we know that, like, of the 30 minutes, we would buy ourselves some time where her anger at us for not practicing could be channeled a little bit towards an even bigger bad guy. And so we would, like, on a bad week, we would know that, oh, did you watch, see what Ken Starr did the other day? Or, and so that would send her at least on track. And I would listen to her. She had interesting thoughts on this stuff, but most importantly, it was to avoid the wrath of our not having actually practiced, which we feared deeply. And, it turned out, though, we thought we were tricking her, but she's like, I know what later she came back one day with the book, and she says, I know what you're doing. I know exactly what you're doing. You didn't practice this week, and I brought something for you. And so she brought a book. It was Ronald Reagan's biography. And she's like, here's what you get. Read it. And now we're going to talk about the piano, but you want to talk about politics, read this. And that actually had an impact on me. You're reading it as a young person in middle school or maybe early high school. And the seeds get planted somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And, later, in my college days, I certainly was libertarian before I became conservative. I still have pretty deeply rooted libertarian instincts, but I'm definitely a conservative today. But yeah, I think a lot about her, actually. And
your parents, from what I've read, they lean left.
My mom doesn't. She leans in a pretty similar direction to me. My dad he wouldn't call himself left, but he has definitely the other side of me on many issues, which is great because we have open debates about it at the dinner table. Even when he was going to law school, actually. So some of those nights, so my mom would take us for the tennis, but sometimes they'd have to divide and conquer a little bit. And so my mom would have my brother I actually would often go with my dad to those law classes at night, and I would sit in the back of the class. And then when we'd be coming back, he'd be railing against Clarence Thomas or Antonin Scalia, which actually part of what probably informed my views too. So I would, take the other side of my dad, and we would, have debates. And it was probably good for me. In 6th or 7th grade, most of the other kids probably didn't know who Clarence Thomas or Antonin Scalia was, and I was sitting in the back of law class with my dad, so we would have 45 minutes on a drive back to talk about it. And so, anyway, the fact of he and I having different views goes back, I think, a long time. And in some ways, I might have even gotten my different views from actually wanting to be contrarian against my dad growing up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What was it that turned you from libertarian into conservative?
I realized that I cared more about issues. What should I say? I cared about more issues than the narrow set of issues that libertarians care about, right? So there's more to me than the first step for me was there's more to me than the libertarian in me. I was a libertarian rapper in college. I enjoyed exercising ideas through. We'd go to like freestyles and open mic
You
nights.
were a rapper.
I was a mediocre rapper. Yeah.
Oh my.
A libertarian with a libertarian orientation. But I realized that, okay, libertarianism is all about the relationship between the state and the individual. Okay, and that's really important. Get the state the heck out of my hair. That's the way I feel about it. I continue to feel about it to this day. Mm-hmm. But there are still the deeper questions of what do we do in that now free world, that world that's free of state intervention? What then? And I think those are really important questions that relate to discovering who am I? Who is my family? What does that mean to me? What is true? What is God? Am I part of something bigger than myself? How does that relate to the culture that I create, both as a father, as an individual, and yes, even as a citizen? And I think those are important questions for a well-flourishing society that go beyond just the relationship between the government and the individual. And I care deeply about those questions. And so that's what led me to say, okay, I'm more than just a libertarian. And then I started to shed the label a little bit even more when, frankly, I became disappointed, disillusioned a little bit when I see other self-professed libertarians not really even standing up for the hard positions that they're committed to with their views. Mm-hmm. I could give you one example that's relevant to some of the books I've written. So in Woke Inc., the first book that I wrote, one of the ideas that I threw out there was to say that if we're going to have protected classes on the basis of race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and national origin, to say you can't fire people for these criteria, well, then I think we should, if we're going to have them at all, we should add political expression to that list. To say that if you can't fire somebody for being black or gay or Muslim or white or Jewish or Christian or Hindu or whatever, that you should not be able to fire them for being an outspoken conservative or an outspoken liberal, for that matter either. We should apply that standard even-handedly. And the critiques I got were from libertarians who say that, self-professed libertarians at least, who say, no, that's intervention in the free market. The market should sort this out. That if these businesses are firing these great conservatives over here, then that's a business opportunity for these other businesses over there to hire them instead. And that we should not want to burden businesses with regulations deciding who they can and cannot fire or associate themselves with. At my core, I'm actually sympathetic to that. But the thing that's disappointing to me is that you can't have it both ways, actually. And in fact, it was the intervention in the market by creating the protected classes, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. Those protected classes are actually what created the viewpoint discrimination we see in the private sector. People say, what do you mean? Well, here's how it worked. Those civil rights laws were passed, and then the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is none other than the alphabet soup of the deep state, interprets those statutes to then say, and they tell companies, and I've been a CEO, right? Any CEO who goes through HR training understands this, that you cannot create, now you can not only not discriminate based on those attributes, which is what the civil rights laws say, But now, per the deep state's interpretation of it and application of those regulations now to companies, it also means that you cannot create what they call a hostile work environment for those protected classes. Well, how does one create a hostile work environment? Let's talk about it. Real case of a grandmother who wore a red sweater every Friday to work to celebrate veterans and to celebrate our troops. And she had a little group that got together on Fridays for lunch at the office to do it. A member of a protected class complained to HR, claiming that that was a microaggression, that created a hostile work environment. So they talk to the lady and they say, hey, we don't want you doing this in the workplace anymore. She didn't like it, but she's okay, fine. She still wears a red sweater to work on Fridays, and then she hangs it on the back of her chair at work. Well, that's still apparently a vestige of the microaggression, at which point they had her remove that. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stands on the side of this being an actual hostile work environment case. Okay? So now you're a company that could be liable under the civil rights laws for creating a hostile work environment, which creates the very conditions for viewpoint discrimination in the private sector. So now where are my libertarian friends on this? They should be saying, we want to repeal the protected classes. Get rid of the protected classes. Let the free market work. If people want to fire these silly businesses want to fire good conservatives or good black people or good white people or good Hindu people or good women, that's an opportunity for a different business to hire them. And I think that's true, actually. And I don't think we would see that type of systematic discrimination in the workforce because the market would, I think, mostly correct for it. But none of the libertarians I know had the spine to stand up and say that. They only had the jelly spine to stand up to me to say if I think, say, then, okay, then protect political expression. They say that's a violation of libertarian principles. There's a long answer to your question, but it's actually a pretty important question.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
I actually have true libertarian instincts, but I care as well about culture and family. And I believe that the revival of faith, not by the government, but maybe by the government getting out of the way, the revival of faith and family in our country, these are good things. But libertarians don't have views one way or another on that. I do. That's why I'm a conservative. But I'm also disappointed in the libertarians who will say that adding political expression as a protected class is some libertarian violation when they don't say a peep, and they become the lapdogs of the reigning establishment when they don't touch the civil rights statutes, which I absolutely do think did have some bad unintended consequences for this country.